Welcome back to show number 3. This is number 3, and we've got a guest, Stephen Chalmers. He is a friend of mine, and also he's retired not deputy chief. He was a police chief for the city of Durham, and I've asked him to join us. But before we get started with him, my name is BJ Council. This is UN50, and UN50 helps to teach individuals how to interact safely with law enforcement, specifically Black and brown folks. And in this moment, we do this so we can figure out how we can help police reform and have discussions, candid and raw discussions about police brutality, where policing needs to go in 2020 and beyond, and talking about the events and what we believe can help folks navigate this moment. So before we get into having Steve here, he's going to talk to us about what it was like he wasn't the first Black officer that joined, but he was one of the early Black officers. And because we've been kind of talking about slave patrols as it has moved, that law enforcement is entrenched in that from that point. And it's what we recognize as law enforcement at least needs to acknowledge that. And so we're just doing a little history about that. And we want to talk about what was it like to be one of the first Black officers and what that meant for the community and that type of thing. But what I want to do with my host, to have them reintroduce themselves real quick, and then we're going to kind of start off by just kind of going, what you've been doing the last 2 weeks, and then we'll get into talking to Steve. So Harmony, so we hadn't seen you in a couple of weeks, so what's been going on?
Not a whole bunch. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of saving majority of my master's coursework for this last week. So I've got about 4-ish weeks to complete this week. But otherwise, I'm doing great. Hopeful that I'll not procrastinate for this next summer session. But it's so hard. It's summertime. Like, who wants to be doing schoolwork in the summer? I don't know.
I know. Keep hope alive, Harmony, because I know you're going to procrastinate. Oh, and also, too, I wanted to tell you that I don't know whether you remember meeting my mentee, Zane, at the event. She listened to the podcast, and she has told me to say, tell Harmony I love her. She said she was so awesome. So she was very impressed with you, your honesty, your candor. But she said, please make sure you tell Harmony that she just really enjoyed hearing you talk. So I was like, oh,
my whole heart. I have like goosebumps. Tell her thank you so much. That feedback was always so nice.
Yeah, cool. So what's up, Drew? You're my favorite nephew because what?
I'm the only nephew.
That's right. So what you been up to, Drew?
Nothing, just work and trying to find ways of things what I could do to kind of take what I'm taking from this experience to my school later in the fall, and trying to prepare for the fall. This is my last year in school, so I'm trying to figure out how it's going to look when we go back to campus. Well, if we go back, what will it look like? So just trying to prepare myself for that.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a lot going on for me, actually. It's been kind of interesting. People are calling about doing UN50. I actually have an on-site presentation coming up this week at Orange Recycle Center, so I'm really excited about that. So anybody got any thoughts on, since we have last talked, anybody got any thoughts on Mr. Brooks down in Atlanta? The killing of Mr. Brooks. Any thoughts on that before we get started?
I just think it's interesting how fast the judicial system has been moving in that specific case, just because I think that typically when we see these types of police shootings involving, suspects that, one, are inebriated, or two, have been, I guess, accused of reaching for a weapon, it's a lot slower in the response time. But then we see the cops who murdered Breonna Taylor are, still walking free. So to me, it's just interesting to see how some parts of the country are starting to mobilize and move a lot faster, just as we've seen some of these Confederate monuments being taken down. So I guess it's almost like how much of it is smoke and mirrors and how much of it is substantial, sustainable change that we can depend on over time. So, I know a lot of people are celebrating that, the guy had been charged, but I guess for me, the question is, he's been charged, but now what? What does that mean for, how we select the jury? What does that mean about how we prosecute other police in the future? So I don't know. For me, it's made me feel more confused, more so than affirmed, just because it seems like a big smoke and mirrors type of thing.
Right. I get that. What about you, Drew? Any thoughts on Mr. Brooks in Atlanta?
Something that kind of stuck out to me about this specific one was how quick the media pushed out. I don't know if y'all saw, but the Wendy's that he was at got burnt down not too long after the incident happened. So the media kind of pushed out that it was a Caucasian female. Y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a
Yes.
Caucasian female burned down the Wendy's. So
Yes.
I think that incident kind of brought my eyes to how many Caucasian voices are speaking up for the issues that are going on in today's society, and how quick African American voices are quick to point out that it's not us doing these things. So that I'm just reading a lot of articles about that. It kind of just makes me think a lot.
Yeah. I just saw something today, as a matter of fact, and I guess I shouldn't really say, but it sounds like the white female may have been with Mr. Brooks. They're almost like trying to connect the dot to Mr. Brooks and the white female and the Wendy's. Have you seen that? Did you see that? Have you seen that? Okay, so maybe that's not true. So, all right, so we'll go ahead and get to the guest. Steve, you got any comments on Atlanta with Mr. Brooks? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that you pretty much have touched on a lot of the things, and to get to really what's prompting the type of responses that we're getting right now. And I think there are a number of things that are going on. First of all, as Drew's indicated, you've got a lot of people of the other persuasion who are actually stepping up and also walking hand in hand. Even politically, people on both sides of the aisle have said, look, this stuff is just crazy, it's senseless, and we can't take it anymore. Then you have to look at also the protests as well as the violence that I don't necessarily agree with, but we knew it was going to come to that. Right. So I think a lot of that is out of fear, because a lot of folks don't want that to come to their community. So they're being forced to step up and take some very quick and decisive measures to basically show that they're on board. So I think that even with the monuments and things like that, the time is now for change, if we're going to ever have change, because people are really taking notice, and whether their concerns are legitimate or not, they know what they have to do in order to make this thing right.
Right. Thanks for that. So we want to just kind of go ahead and get into that. I think I mentioned before we started out when our first podcast, it was about slave patrol and how law enforcement is entrenched in that, and then civil rights, Gen Z and the millennials is this civil rights. I also wanted to bring Steve in because he and I were talking about eventually being hired on the police department. I mean, it's the statistics are 77% white across the country is what law enforcement is made of. And the percentage of African Americans continue to hover at just 11% for across this country. So just wanted him to kind of give us some history as to what that looked like when he joined, how that had an impact on what he was seeing in the community. So Steve, I'll let you, and then, you guys ask him questions and stuff like that. So Steve, go ahead.
Well, one thing that I can speak to that I think was an advantage for me and really helped me along during my tenure in law enforcement, and certainly as a police chief, was the fact that when I came on the police department, even though I was not among the first African Americans, I had an opportunity to work with some of the first ones that were hired in the Durham Police Department in patrol as well as a detective. So I was able to really build on their legacy and have an opportunity to work hand in hand with those individuals. Some of those were part of one of the first community relations programs that the Durham Police Department started during the 60s, basically to quell some of the violence and the things that were going on in the community, dealing with some of the things that we're dealing with right now. So where we are right now is certainly where we've been many times before during the history of law enforcement. So this is nothing new.
So let me ask you this. So you're saying that back then they created a community piece to deal with the unrest in the Black community? Is that what did I just hear? You said that about the community relations piece.
Yeah, that basically was during the 60s, during the civil rights era. They started a community relations program with African American officers, and their responsibility was to go out to create better and more positive relations with the community. So I think we've had some good models, some good programs over the years. But again, And I think like Harmony was saying, you know, is this just kind of some lip service? Is something that they, you know, gonna act like they want to do, or do, you know, talk the talk, but not walk the walk? And until things kind of calm down a little bit, do we go back to business as usual? And I think this, what we have to make certain with right now, is that that's not the case. Police reform has happened over and over and over, but we continue to deal with the same problems again and again and again. So we have to kind of, especially as it relates to policing, we need to kind of make certain that it's the purpose of police to control and oppress, or to protect and serve.
Right.
And speaking, you know, with the slave patrols, you know, they was basically to control and oppress individuals and keep slavery in place and things like that. But over the years, you know, what we have to look at now is not just reforming law enforcement, but also making certain that there is a transforming of law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the questions, and how do we do that? I mean, I think we know, if we looked at the Senate committee and all of the things they're talking about, we know what we need to be doing. But where's the accountability? And also, you know, again, are we just going to look at law enforcement? And I think that's going to be the big issue right there. Right. Because what we need to look at, not just reforming law enforcement, but also the whole service delivery plan and model that we use to serve our communities. As long as we don't improve the conditions and provide the support that people need, the police and community are going to always be at odds. The Black and brown community, they're going to always be at odds, because you're not investing in people, not improving the people's positions.
Right. Steve, you and I talked, and that was one reason I wanted to bring you on, because one of the things that you said I thought was really profound, that you said was that they finally hired Black officers. So you got on the bus, right? And
right.
So they let Black officers on the bus, and then in some instances they started letting black officers drive the bus. But then you're in your community, and you guys, you know, are identifying whatever those issues are, which were possibly social issues. But they didn't give you guys the tools to do that, and the only tool law enforcement has is to make an arrest. So that's kind of what I want to talk about. Now, you know, the Black officers were on the bus, saw stuff, but you didn't get the tools that you needed to deal with what mostly was not stuff that needed to be dealt with law enforcement.
Right. I mean, and I think that was really, really the purpose for community policing, was to really go into communities, develop communication, develop trust, develop understanding, and also identify exactly what the needs of the communities were. And once we've done that, then what we needed to do was also be able to bring to bear the resources and the support that the community needed. This is one of the things that we did with the Partners Against Crime initiative back in '92 and '93 in Northeast Central Durham. And the one good that is a model, I think, that served us well, and I think we've kind of moved away from it some, and I think that we need to really move back and re-examine that. But this was not just community policing, it was community empowerment, and there's a difference, because what we need to understand is that we work at the will of the people, and that we are public servants, but we work for the community, whether we elected officials, appointed, law enforcement, regardless. We work for the will of the people. And with the Northeast Central Durham model, what we did was we basically brought in the community leaders and basically sat with them and let them basically identify what their needs were. And then the mayor and the city council at that time, the city manager at that time, actually appointed a representative from every city department to basically meet with them and develop a plan based on their needs. So if it was recreation, you had Parks and Rec. If it was housing, you had the housing department, but you had all of the representatives there, because that's what's going to make the difference. Because if you start to look at what the root causes of crime, and you start to realize that these are the things that law enforcement does not have the tools to address. So you're going to have to make certain that you have the necessary resources and the support to go in to address the things that cause people to actually look at crime as an option, as a viable option to their lifestyle that they're living.
So, okay, I guess that's exactly that's kind of, I kind of really don't. I mean, I want to bring you back to talk about that. I'm kind of wanting to figure out what was happening early on. You know, when you were doing the, you know, that early part of the developing the relationship in the '60s. You know, when you identified those issues that they had, you know, did you have support from you know, the white administration and the police department in order to address those issues? That's kind of what I'm looking for, because you know, obviously I'm familiar with that part. I need some I want to try to talk about this history before that, because I'm going to eventually bring you back so we can talk about community policing, partners against crime. But I kind of want some groundwork on the front end as to those early stages of community relations with when black officers first got here. Did you get the necessary stuff you needed to help that relationship from the white administration?
Well, keeping in mind, you know, I was not here in the '60s. I came in '75.
Right.
So I came in after that, those early officers and all of those programs. But basically from, you know, of Durham, this group of officers really laid the groundwork to improve relationships, you know, with the black community.
Okay.
And they primarily worked in those particular areas, just again to make certain that those individuals had a voice. Now I think that was pretty much the gist of that program, is making certain that people who look like them, that they felt comfortable talking with, and they could bring that information back to the elected officials to basically let them know what their thoughts were.
Okay. You guys got any questions? Because I think you just said something that, you know, that is definitely profound as this police reform goes on. The culture is going to change when more folks inside these police departments looks like the communities that they serve. You guys got any questions for Steve or comments on everything he said yet?
I just think he had like a couple of really, really poignant points. When, you know, when we talk about crime, I think it's really easy to just assume that we are just lawless individuals that are deviant, which in a lot of cases is not the truth. And I think that because we've been fed this narrative for so long, it makes it really, really easy to vilify people that commit crimes. And, you know, while, you know, some crimes are just heinous and don't really make a lot of sense to people like you and me who, you know, have the tools necessarily to emotionally regulate or get the resources that we need when we're lacking, you know, we don't really see the other side of why crime happens. And so for me, it's really interesting to hear somebody in law enforcement actually acknowledge that it's not necessarily just that we're trying to rein in lawless individuals, but we really have to look at the whole system of why people commit crimes and also how we can, you know, intercept before it gets to that point. And what was also interesting to me, Steve, was when you mentioned that, you know, in the '60s, they decided to increase police presence to decrease crime. So for me, that, you know, I never understood that connection of, you know, in order to keep people in line, let's get more police officers, let's have more harsh punishments. I mean, even in states where the death penalty is legal, we don't necessarily see a decrease in violent crime or premeditated crime. So, you know, my question, not necessarily to Steve, but just in general, is why do we always think that increasing police presence is what keeps people safe versus, you know, affordable housing or equitable school systems, or even just access to like food and water and equitable energy, you know? So I don't know, hearing that for me was really reassuring, because like, you know, knowing Steve, knowing the work that he's done in the community, you know, I think that it's a testament of his beliefs, but then the question is, well, where are the other officers? You know what I mean? Like, yes, we do have a more progressive chief, but we saw before CJ Davis got in, there was a really big difference between when Steve was chief and when, what was his name? Jose Lopez, when he was chief. I mean, it's just such a vast difference. And, you know, how many of those officers that came in under Lopez are still, you know, perpetuating the system of continued oppression and not serving? So I just had a lot of thoughts with Steve. I wish that you would just go back into the force. I understand that you're retired and probably don't want to, but, you know, your words are just so impactful. And I think anybody that knows you knows that this is, you know, just how you live your life. And that's important to me to know, that we have people like you out here that actually think that way.
And thank you very much, Harmony, for the compliments. And I guess, you know, again, BJ, maybe it may be a conversation for later, but you know, how many, you're right on target with what you're talking about. And if I just kind of take a moment, is that back during the time when I was police chief, again, I had to make certain that my philosophy of policing was the philosophy of policing for the entire organization. And I had to make certain that regardless of which officer in the organization they stopped and asked about the philosophy, they spoke my words. Mm-hmm. And I think I got a lot of criticism during my tenure from elected officials, as well as from some of the people in the business community, about having too many soft programs. Because mm-hmm. my philosophy is that we have to get in the community, we have to talk with people, we have to find out what's going on, what the needs are, and help connect them to resources. And when you see a community improve, when you see people improve, they will help to really police themselves and their communities. Mm-hmm. But if you leave them in that devastated and type of situation where you have substandard housing, they're underemployed, and all of the things that go along with poverty, that's living in poverty, then again, your role for the most part is going to revert back to enforcement. And I did not yield to my philosophy, even under the criticism. I kept my community policing programs going. I kept the officers in all the public housing communities. And when I left, public housing had the lowest crime rate in the city. And it was a testament to the fact that we had people who were not there specifically just to lock folk up. And they were developing relationships and they were helping people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Drew, you got anything? Comment?
There was something I wanted to say to a point he made a long time ago, but and I'm going to confirm what he just said too. But the thing about how they place police officers in Black communities I don't want to use this word, but as like pawns to say like, oh, we have Black cops, so y'all should be okay. That stuck to me. That kind of stuck to my brain a little when you said that, because I don't know how I would react as a citizen just to know that they were placed just for that. If I would know that, I don't know how different the citizens would have taken that. And to the point you just said, I think your methodology behind policing is needed in a lot of communities, and I don't see that a lot. And I commend you for your work that you did during the time that you spent as chief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we would tease Steve. It's community policing just come under his ears and his shoes. They squeak so much. It's just oozing with community policing, runs through his veins. And he did get a lot of flack when he was there about that. And but it worked. I mean, we got to talk to the folks in the community and be a part and hear what they say. Because I remember when so Steve's been talking about Partners Against Crime, one of the things that Steve said, that what we found out if you're really doing community policing instead of policing the community, and what we found out was they really didn't want police. They wanted to take care of housing, abandoned vehicles, boarded up property around there, those type lighting, had nothing to do with law enforcement. So when you go in and ask people what do they want, we police go in and ask a community what they want. They don't want anything that we got to offer, which is cool. And so what that program, Partners Against Crime, that is the foundation, his mark will be on this police department into infinity. And it's because of that work that he and Chief Jackie McNeil did and Steve promoted that we have the kind of relationship here with law enforcement in Durham that we have because of him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think you're right, BJ, because one of the things when we would meet with community after community, and we would ask them to give us maybe a top 10 list of their needs and what we need to address in their community. Crime was always about halfway down the list, never at the top, never at the top, regardless of how much crime was going on in the community. There was always jobs, it was always housing, and really always at the top was really activities and programs for kids. Mm-hmm. So, when you can provide these types of things and understanding, really, look, these are the kind of things that we need. But if you do not provide those real initial needs of the community, then what you're doing is moving back to the fact that you are treating them as if they are really kind of secondary citizens. They're not as important as other people in other communities. So when you start to treat them that way, you're going to get resistance, and you're not going to have the best type of relationship.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
again, if we're going to see a difference, we're going to have to look at police reform. Certainly, there are some organizations that need to be reformed. There are some organizations that need to be just disassembled because of the racist and the biased manner in which they provide police servicing. But at the same time, with police reform, what we're going to have to do is basically come up with consistent practices and programs and things that need to be actually pushed and made part of every organization. And once that's done, there's got to be some accountability. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, and again, we're speaking that's just law enforcement. But what we need to do is also make certain that those top 1 through 5 things that people need in the community, as well as from crime on down, are addressed through elected officials, and other folk need to be held accountable. Our school system need to be held accountable. You know,
Absolutely.
our housing department, all of the needs of that community, because basically, BJ, you know, like I do, every 3 months when we would have to go before city council and talk about the crime rate, nobody ever talked about any other departments or what they were doing or who was failing other than the department.
Right.
So we are the only ones that that are getting a report card.
Right.
And you know, and again, that is the thing that we need folk to understand, is that this is not to be a team effort. It's going to have to be a comprehensive effort once we go into community. The entire service delivery plan needs to be revamped. Yeah. Everybody needs to be held accountable.
Yeah. Were you going to say something over me?
I was just going to say, like, you know, in social work, we have this idea of self-determination, which is basically honoring and valuing people's ability to, 1, govern themselves, but 2, to actually speak to what it is that they need. And I think that a big issue that we have in public service spaces, not just law enforcement, but as Steve was saying, it's a very comprehensive system reform that needs to happen. People in these positions, they come most of the time from a place of privilege, and they assume that they know what's best for other people. And that's why you see when we do like community-based participatory research, which is the type of mental health research that I had done, you just see a big difference. You see a different level of engagement, and you also see that you're actually able to speak to the things that people need in order to make a substantial change. And, you know, Steve was also speaking about like the living conditions that people have. I don't know if anybody has ever been, you know, hungry for an extended amount of time. I get really irritable if my power is off for a couple hours because of a storm. Can you imagine this being your everyday life? Right. You know, it makes sense to me that people are a lot more reactionary in these circumstances, and I think that we all would be, but it's so easy to judge from a place of privilege. And, you know, I think that we just have to keep that in mind, is for privileged and educated individuals that have had, you know, definitely our experiences with racism and prejudice, but the way that we are able to exist and move throughout the world merely because we have, you know, some amount of insight, to me is impactful. And it's our duty to really make sure that other Black and brown folks in these impoverished communities have the same ability to be heard and to be valued. And, you know, at the very end of the day, to just be respected as human beings.
Human beings, yeah, totally. And what was the study that you did? I mean, what was that? What is that?
So it's called community-based participatory research. It's basically a type of research that you do, and it's, you go into communities and you ask them what are the things that they're struggling with. How would they like to structure the research study? So, you know, in studies, we kind of have this idea of what research is supposed to look like. And so what we do instead is we ask them, how should this look? One big difference between like white people that we interview about mental health and Black people that we interview about mental health is the way that we talk about the word guilt or anger, the way that we attribute like the adjectives of what these words mean to us is very different, right? So, you know, when we're using terms that I would say, I guess, identify more with white people, then we're going to miss some Black folks simply because they can't relate to the type of language that we're using. So that's basically what community-based participatory research is. And I think that that's also what you were saying is a part of the Partners Against Crime, is actually honoring people as the authors of their own stories, the writers
Right.
of their own stories, and giving them the ability to self-determine and really make those choices about what is important to me, what is not important to me, and where my community needs the most help. And like Steve said, it's never crime. It's, you know, feeding our children. It's having, you know, access to a damn school bus that's safe and can get our kids to school. Did you guys hear about the people camping out in front of the police department right now?
No.
Yes.
You heard about that, Steve? Yeah. So they basically are saying that the way that the city is allocating their city budget is not fair, and we need to reallocate more money towards Black and Brown communities. So these same people that were protesting to, you know, lock up the officers that killed George Floyd and Breonna Taylor are now out here saying that's not enough. We need money and we need resources so that we can make these substantial changes in our neighborhoods, like grocery stores, you know, access to fresh and healthy foods. There's no reason. I mean, I can't even think of the closest grocery store to McDougal Terrace or Cornwallis. Like I physically can't even place it because there really aren't grocery stores. You know, they have those mini marts, but if you think of like the price markup,
Right.
to be able to go to a mini mart versus going to a food line and getting a gallon of orange juice. I mean, it's not something that we think of because you and I can afford an extra 50 cents to $1 for a gallon of orange juice. Whereas, you know, the mom in McDougal Terrace has to make the choice between eating and keeping the lights on a regular basis. So, you know, it's this big systems thing. And I think that that's why I get so frustrated. It's because, you know, absolutely law enforcement needs to be reforms, like Steve said, and, you know, put together again, I think. But it doesn't just stop there. So how do we continue the conversation to hold everybody accountable? Because that seems to be a really big thing today, is accountability. And what does that look like?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Drew, you got anything?
I had a question, but I want to ask later after.
No, good.
It was just I wanted to ask Mr. Steve, like, how different do you think this generation will kind of take? Because I know you've seen this before and how people are reacting to police brutality and stuff. How different do you think this time is, or why do you think this time is different?
Well, one of the things I think that is different now is that what happened with George Floyd has been happening for years and years and years. And they've had video recordings. They've had, I mean, everything that we had in this particular situation. But I don't know, this was a tipping point for some reason, that this particular situation, and I think that just that fact that they held that camera there for almost 10 minutes, just watching, that was something that Americans could turn their heads to. And then once they really sunk in, I think it started, even the people who have turned their heads to it in past situations started to realize, yes, this has been happening. And we can't continue to allow this, the way this makes us look. So again, the momentum is there. What we need to make certain is that we take advantage of it. We take advantage of the opportunities to bring people together to have these conversations. And I mentioned earlier, not just community and policing, but community empowerment. The community needs to be involved in every aspect of this change, from law enforcement to the city delivery service to our county agencies to deal with health and all of the different issues. But pretty much, again, we need to make certain that we have good leadership from the community that's going to step up and that we support them. But again, this entire system has to be revamped and changed, and we're going to have to move forward to make certain that every system is revamped, and that, again, there is some accountability, and that every quarter we have long-term, short-term goals, and everyone is responsible for putting together a plan, coming up with their budget. Now, when we start talking about defunding law enforcement is something that it should happen over the course of time. I mean, realistically, it doesn't make sense that it would not, because if you're doing the other things that you need to do, you're going to have less need for more and more law enforcement. When police chiefs start to ask for more money for more officers, that means something else is failing. It's not just law enforcement, it's the other aspects of community, the other service delivery parts that are not doing what they need to do, because what drives crime is the conditions are getting worse.
Yeah.
So again, So defunding police should take place, but it should be a natural process that goes along with providing services and improving people's lives and improving communities. If you do those things, that defunding would take care of itself.
All right. Cool. We're going to be talking about abolish police and defunding on our next show. So I want to, but yeah, I appreciate that comment because I'll be able to have something to jump off of when we start our next show. So, Steve, you got anything last words? We'll go ahead and I appreciate you being here with us. I think you've, especially for my Gen Z and millennial, you've given them some information, you know, from definitely from the perspective of being a police chief, you know, what that looks like and how we need to, how creating community police and the work that's done isn't anything that can't be done now. You know what I'm saying? It's just, this is not, it's not rocket science. It's just getting people to the right folks at the table and the right other folks, housing, education, and holding them accountable. They all have to be there. So it's just not difficult. So any last words, Chief?
Well, I think we hit it right on. And if we're speaking, you know, specifically for law enforcement, again, as you said earlier, we got the right people on the bus. We've got the right people in the right seats. And starting about 25, 30 years ago, there was a push to start looking for more and more people of color to lead organizations, law enforcement organizations. So we have a lot of capable people who actually understand community. So and they're driving the bus. The main thing is, again, is the support going to be there? The resources going to be there? And again, are we going to listen to the community? And again, if we put those pieces in place, and if the elected officials stand up and take notice and agree that, look, we're going to fix this problem once and for all, because every 20, 30 years we go through a reform, that's ridiculous. And then we end up back in the same place that we are. So again, we're just hoping and praying that, you know, we can really take advantage of this opportunity and George Floyd's death would not be in vain.
Yeah. All right, cool. You guys got any final words on Steve?
I guess I would thank you for the words that you gave. I kind of was a sponge to this episode and just kind of took everything that you said and listened and took mental notes about the things you were saying. So I appreciate you talking to a youngster like me so I can pass these words on to the other youngsters.
Well, you're the future, young man.
And Steve, you are just such a radical, I think that you're radical, revolutionary type of person and such a strong yet gentle voice. And, you know, I think a lot of times now we don't hear that a lot. You know what I mean? Somebody that's calm and gentle, but very direct. And I can always tell that you speak from a place of love and from a place of really wanting things to be different. So I'm just thankful to know you, thankful that people like you have existed in the police force here in Durham. And I'm hopeful that these type of attitudes won't be something that we need to throw a party about, right? Because it'll be more just routine and more natural. And I definitely credit you with a lot of just the changes that we're seeing constantly within the Durham Police Department. So as always, super impressed and really thankful to know you and be able to do this work with you.
Thank you, and it's been a pleasure to work with you. And I feel very comfortable knowing that we have people like you in place who are concerned, who are dedicated to the cause, and they're going to be out there working, you know, for our people.
Cool.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate it. So follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And be well, be safe, and peace.